Thank you, Laura, for reminding me. Welcome to the North Central Regional Climate and Drought Outlook for February of 2024. As you know, we do this on a monthly basis every single month, third Thursday at 1 p.m. Central Time. And my name is Doug Cluck. I work for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration here in Kansas City, Missouri. And we're pretty much talking about the area from the Great Lakes to the Rockies and everything in between. So just a couple items of note is that number one, our speaker today is Matt Sittel. He's works in the Kansas State Climatologist Office. He's the assistant state climatologist there in Kansas. Well, I'm also joined by the state climatologist out of South Dakota, who will answer the tough questions at the end. And that's the other thing I wanted to mention is that at the end, we will get to your questions. And if you have any questions, please post them in the question box. Or if you have comments, do that. We generally don't look at the chat section very much. So Matt will go for 35, 40 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. And I think that's all I need to say. So Matt, take it away.
All righty. Thank you, Doug. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Matthew Sittel, Assistant State Climatologist based at Kansas State University here in Manhattan. I'm pleased to be giving my presentation for the first time. Some general information before we get started. This presentation and all presentations are a collaborative effort of the agencies that you see on the screen there. This regularly scheduled webinar is every third Thursday of the month, and our next presentation will be on March 21st, 1 p.m. Central, 12 noon Mountain. Our presenter will be the Colorado Assistant State Climatologist, Becky Bollinger. If you'd like to review any past webinars, including this one, there's a couple of links on the screen where you can source those. Also, they're available in video streaming format as well as the slides in PDF. And as Doug alluded to earlier, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them as we go, and we will address those after the presentation. The outline for today will start by reviewing the past weather for the month of January, and then take a look at where things stand February so far. Not only just the month of February, but seasonal snowfall totals, as well as a look at snowpack and ice coverage. We'll talk about a few local impacts, significant things that have happened here in the last month. And we'll take a peek at the U.S. drought, the current conditions of the U.S. Drought Monitor. And then finally, we'll finish up by looking at future weather and the climate outlooks, including precipitation forecast as well as ENSO. Let's start with January's temperature rankings. These are the numbers officially released from the National Centers for Environmental Information. The numbers you see here represent the ranking of the January average temperature in each state with respect to the full 130-year period of record, which dates back to 1895. If we look at these numbers, we see a variety of different things here. We see 3 states in our north central region were below normal for the month. And then we have a band to the north of that through South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, where temperatures were near normal. And then as we get up closer to the Great Lakes region, the highest numbers that we see in the north central region appear in those 3 states of Michigan, Minnesota, as well as Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, 121 represents the 10th warmest January on record. And for Minnesota next door, it was the 11th warmest January on record. If we take a look at the individual counties and the temperature anomalies that were measured there, we see a little more detail than we did at the state level. And I think the most striking thing that we look at here is the high temperature anomalies over 9 degrees Fahrenheit that are present in eastern North Dakota, much of Minnesota, as well as northern Wisconsin. Then we go further south in those states that we saw earlier that were below normal for January, and we see many counties running 3 to as much as 5 degrees below normal. Interestingly, the coldest and warmest anomalies in the country occurred in our central region this past month. Coldest, Barton County, Kansas, home to Great Bend, 5.5 degrees below normal for the month of January. On the warm side, Lake of the Woods County, Minnesota, up the northwest angle of Minnesota, plus 12.6 degrees. That was the highest anomaly in the country. Now, for those locations where we saw below normal temperatures during January, the main reason why was there was an Arctic air outbreak in the middle of the month. And this map, courtesy of the Midwest Regional Climate Center, illustrates just how far below normal temperatures were between the 12th and the 18th of January. As much as 25 degrees below normal, widespread from Montana through the Nebraska Panhandle down into Kansas. Further to the east, temperatures were still running 10 to 15 degrees below normal. And in some cases, these temperatures were cold enough to set new monthly records. There were dozens of new record lows for the month of January that were set during this Arctic outbreak. I've listed 5 of them here, one each from 5 different states. You know, 2 of these actually were cold enough to set all-time station records. At Dillon, Montana, where it was 41 below zero, and at Lyman, Colorado, where it was minus 30. The coldest reading that I could find from this Arctic outbreak was a bone-chilling minus 54 degrees. That was in Chester, Montana, which is up on the High Line in far northern Montana, on January the 13th. Now, as we go back a month, you recall that December was also well above normal. And this is a kind of a common thing that we would expect during an El Nino winter. You remember 7 states in December set their all-time records for the warmest December on record. And when we combine December with January, if we look at those 2 months together, these are the rankings of the December-January pairs across the U.S. And all of the states in the north central region are above normal for the December and January period. Again, that's exactly what we would expect during an El Nino winter. And 3 of our states here, you see the ones that I've boxed in here, ranked 129th. Well, there's only 129 December-January pairs, which means for Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, they all have experienced their warmest December and January on record, again, dating back to 1895. And the anomalies for these 3 states running from 9 to 11 degrees above normal. And in the case of Minnesota, this was the warmest December in January by a little over 2 degrees. So extremely warm conditions. And as it stands now, these 3 states have a very good chance of setting the record for the all-time warmest winter. And when we say winter, we're talking about meteorological winter, which is December, January, and February. In fact, as long as these 3 states finish above normal for the month of February, they will indeed set a new record for the winter. Now, speaking of February, where do we stand now in terms of anomalies for temperatures? This is the map for the first half of February. Take a look. Yeah, Minnesota is, as I said, stands a very good chance of setting that new record because right now the anomalies over the state of Minnesota are running 15 to almost 25 degrees above normal right now. In fact, all of the north central region, with the exception of a little small area there in western Colorado, we're above normal again this month. Now, I was looking at Fargo, North Dakota, for example. So far this month, they're 22.4 degrees above normal. So very unusual to have 3 months in a row here that are going to be very warm. So time will tell as to see whether or not we actually set records for the warmest winters in those 3 states. And there's a couple of other states. North Dakota and Iowa are within 1 degree right now of their warmest winters. So be sure to check back in next month and see which states actually achieved that record. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and take a look at precipitation. Here are the same formatted rankings that we saw earlier for temperature. Now, these are for precipitation. On this map, the higher the number that you see, that is the wetter than normal the conditions were. And what we see in the north central region is a number of our states had top 20 wettest Januaries on record, including Kansas through Iowa, Illinois, Missouri. Highest ranked state is Indiana, number 120. That represents the 11th wettest January on record. You'll contrast that with what you see up near the Canadian border with the 4 states that are shaded in as below average. And North Dakota was the driest of those 4. It was the 10th driest January on record in the state of North Dakota. We take a look at the county specific rankings on this next map. You'll see that we had a number of areas in our north central region that were above normal, ranked as wetter than normal. There's one county in the U.S. that actually had their driest January on record. And that was Washington County, Minnesota, where they averaged only 0.08 of an inch of precipitation. Now, that was not the driest county in the United States for the month of January. That honor goes to Divide County, North Dakota, the northwesternmost county in North Dakota, where they averaged only 0.03 of an inch of precipitation for the month of January. On the other hand, there's a few counties that had their wettest January on record. And you see a couple of those in southeast Iowa, and then there are 4 of them in southeast lower Michigan. Detroit, it's in Wayne County, had their second wettest January on record, but the actual observing site of Detroit, it was their wettest January on record in 2024. And that's a 151-year period of record where they had 5.25 inches of precipitation. So very wet in lower Michigan in January. Now, not only was it rainy, it was also very cloudy during the month of January. And here's a map that was generated by climatologist Brian Brett Schneider, who put together a map to rank the cloudiness during January with respect to the last 85 January. So going back to the year 1940. And where you see the grays to the darker gray to the black, those areas had a top 10 cloudiest January. And that includes much of the upper Midwest around in the Great Lakes region, through Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, but most notable is the state of Michigan. That's where we see those darkest colors. And that indicates that these areas had one of the 3 cloudiest Januaries on record dating back to 1940. And I took a closer look at a few locations here and discovered that in Muskegon, Michigan, every day in January was overcast. And for the other cities listed there, they only had 1 or 2 days where they were not overcast during the month of January. And as it turned out, in the case of Muskegon, this is the first and only time since 1951 that they've had a month where they had 100% overcast. January, December, regardless of the month. First time it's happened in Muskegon. And for the other locations, they either set new or tied existing marks for their cloudiest January on record. Now, you'll note from the average numbers there, Muskegon is cloudy 73% of the time during January. So it's not unusual to be cloudy, but to be 100% of the time overcast, that certainly was unusual. Now, it was also foggy. And one of the things that some of the other climatologists were discussing yesterday in preparation for this meeting is there was an extended period of time where we had foggy conditions. This map illustrates the number of days through January that at least one county within each of the National Weather Service's county warning areas was under a dense fog advisory. And the winner, at least in the North Central region, was the Sioux Falls Weather Service office, where 12 days out of the month, at least one of the counties in that county warning area was under a dense fog advisory. These numbers are above normal, and I don't have a slide that shows it, but in general, this was one of the 3 most foggy events in the last 20 years in terms of the month of January. And the majority of these foggy days occurred in the second half of January after the Arctic outbreak that we had. We began to warm up and had some snow melt, and that led to these foggy days here. So as I said, a number of us noticed just how foggy it was in the month of January. In addition to fog, some of us had a very snowy January. Again, Mr. Brett Schneider produced another map where he illustrated the rankings of the total snow amounts over the last 50 winters across the lower 48 states. And you'll see, running from Nebraska through Iowa up into Illinois and Wisconsin, these areas had one of their 2 or 3 snowiest Januaries on record. We can take a look at a few specific locations. And I chose 4 in Iowa and 1 that's almost in Iowa. Moline, Illinois represents the Weather Service official office for the Quad Cities region. These areas typically have between 7 and 11 inches of snow in the month of January, but in 2024 had between 25 and up to 31 inches of snow in Ottumwa. Those totals rank in the top 3 snowiest Januaries ever in these locations. And there's periods of records for these stations range from 107 up to 140 years. So the amount of snow that was received here was definitely unusual. Now, if we think about snow and temperature, there is an index called the acronym is pronounced AUSSI. It's the Accumulated Winter Season Severity Index. It's an index that takes into account temperatures as well as snowfall and snow depth. And as the winter wears on, it's an accumulated index that the colder it gets and the more snow that falls and the longer the snow stays on the ground, the higher the index goes. Well, so far in this winter, you'll see the majority of the north central region has red markers there, and that indicates what is considered to be a mild winter. You'll also note that some of these locations actually have diamonds on them. In fact, there are 27 locations in the north central region that are marked as record. That means that so far, the winter of 2023 to 24 is the mildest winter on record. This index goes back to 1950. So in the case of these locations that are indicated as being records, that means it was the mildest winter so far with respect to this index of the last 74 years. So very unusual. And as we've seen with the much above normal temperatures, it should come as no surprise that these stations are having a mild winter. Now, one of the reasons it's so mild, of course, is a lack of snow cover. And if we take a look at the current snow depth map as of 11Z, that was 5 a.m. this morning, we don't see a whole lot of snow cover in the north central U.S. There is a new swath of snow that fell overnight, ranging across from South Dakota through Minneapolis. St. Paul had officially, I believe it was 6.9 inches of snow in the last 24 hours. That's by far the most they've had this winter. It's been very unusual for them. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that the snow in this area is going to be sticking around for too long because, as you'll see in just a few moments when we discuss the forecast, it looks like there's going to be a swing back to warmer temperatures. But for now, this was certainly a welcome sight because there's been so little snow. Speaking of snow, let's take a look at the total accumulated snowfall since October 1st. This is, again, courtesy of the Midwest Regional Climate Center. The thing that stands out to me the most in the north central region is the lighter colors over Minnesota. And where you see Minneapolis to the southwest towards Mankato and New Ulm, these are areas that have had between 1 and 10 inches of snow. This does not, I should point out, does not include the snow that fell overnight. So they've obviously, these numbers will be a little bit higher and future maps would have those totals updated. But for most of the for the north central region, we see totals ranging from roughly 10 to 30 inches. Now, this map is kind of difficult to look at and say, well, how does that, what is that with respect to normal? So I included this map here that shows you the departure from normal of the snowfall totals since October 1st. This is a much better map, in my opinion, to show you just how little snow has fallen in the Great Lakes region. Take a look at the UP of Michigan, areas, say Ironwood, Keweenaw Peninsula, as much as 60 to 80 inches below normal in terms of snowfall so far this winter. For Minnesota, those totals run from 10 to 30 inches below normal. So even though Minneapolis had nearly 7 inches of snow, they're still running at least 20 inches below normal. So it's a start. We certainly need more snowfall in this area. The only areas above normal for snowfall so far are parts of Kansas, northern Missouri, Iowa, like we talked about earlier with the heavy snow in the month of January, as well as eastern Nebraska. We also see some much below normal totals in the west. The area around Yellowstone National Park kind of stands out there with being at least 50 inches below normal, as well as parts of Montana as well. If we take a look at the collective snowpack that's in place now and think about the amount of water present in that snowpack, this map here illustrates for various regions, basins, what the snowpack's total water is with respect to percent of normal. Colorado looks pretty good right now. They're below normal, admittedly, but the percentages you see there are running 88 to 94%. As we go further north, though, you see numbers start to decrease. And Montana really stands out here because those percentages are running from 46% to 67% of normal. So there has been a huge snow drought in the state of Montana, which is very concerning. We can take a closer look at these totals with respect to the Missouri River Basin on this next graphic here. There's two plots here. The one on the left represents the amount of snowpack so far as we've gone through since October 1st for the parts of Montana, at least the Missouri River above Fort Peck, which is in northeast Montana. The plot on the right is from Fort Peck to Garrison, which is in western North Dakota. Right now, The current snowpack above Fort Peck is only at 64% of normal, and the snowpack from Fort Peck to Garrison is at 68% of normal. Now, you'll note there's a green line there. That green line on each of those two plots represents the year in which the maximum snow water equivalent that occurred during the year was a minimum. So right now, in the area above Fort Peck, we are running below the year 2015. That was the year in which the maximum snow water was only around 12 inches. So it is concerning now that we are running as far below as we are. There's certainly time totals, but if we don't have any snow anytime soon, this is going to be very important, because as it melts, flows into the river, and that all flows downstream, and we certainly need all the snow we can get. So we can look at the Platte River Basin as well, a little bit further south, North Platte and South Platte Basins through Wyoming and Colorado. A little closer to normal. These plots do not have the green lines on them that the one previously, but we can see that in both of these basins, we're running below normal, 85 to 89% of average. So it's a little better news, as we saw on the previous map, for Wyoming and for Colorado with some higher percentages. But still, these areas could definitely benefit for some more snow. Now, what about the Great Lakes? Let's go over to the east. Now, in this map, the light blue that you see over the majority of the Great Lakes, unfortunately, does not represent ice. It represents the lack of ice. And there's really very little ice on the Great Lakes currently. There's a few areas that have some minor amounts of ice around Saginaw Bay, eastern side of Green Bay, as well as up in Thunder Bay and Georgian Bay in Canada. Now, overall, the total amount of Great Lakes ice coverage right now is only 4% of normal, or excuse me, I'm sorry, just 4% of the total area of the Great Lakes. And individually on the lakes, Lake Huron is the highest, just 10% coverage right now. And Lake Erie is the lowest. It is completely ice-free right now, 0%. Now, is this normal? How unusual is 4% ice coverage? Well, in all cases, for all lakes and for the Great Lakes as a whole, these are all record low minimums. The normal amounts are plotted in the red there, and you'll see that normally at this time of year, 40% of the Great Lakes should be covered in ice, but it's only 4% right now. And in the case of Lake Erie, normally 68% of Lake Erie is covered. Right now, it's 0%. So it is very unusual to have this little ice around the Great Lakes right now. We can take a look at this a little bit differently. This plot represents the red line as the historical average from 1973 through 2023 of the percent of ice coverage that we would expect over all of the Great Lakes taken as a whole. And the black line is 2024. And you'll see that the highest coverage that we've had this winter was only about 16%, and that occurred in the later part of January after we had the Arctic outbreak between the 12th and the 18th that we looked at earlier. And after that time, with milder weather, that percentage has dropped, and again sits at 4% right now, the lowest amount of ice on record since 1973 over the Great Lakes right now. So very unusual. Now, one of the things that's interesting to look at are some of the local impacts that have resulted from the weather that we've seen so far in the month of January. We're going to start back in the west again in Montana. The Tetons Pass Ski Resort announced recently that they were going to close for the season because there simply isn't any snow. Unfortunately for the ski resort, they were only open for 4 days this winter. And the gentleman who owns the ski resort said in the letter that he wrote to the public, said, we have the lowest levels of moisture at this ski resort in the last 55 years. I've included a plot there from SnowTel, which is an automated snow reporting system. And the black line that appears on that graph is below all of the other years combined. So indeed is currently the lowest amount of snow water in the snowpack at Teton Pass in 55 years. So as we saw earlier with the slides with the low percentages for the basins there, definitely unusual and unfortunate for those people who like skiing and for the gentleman that owns the resort. A little bit further east, check out all these fun events in Minnesota. U.S. Pond Hockey Championships, dog sledding marathon, golf tournament over ice, snowmobile drag races, all fun events normally, but unfortunately, all of those events had to be canceled this year because, as we've seen, it was so far above normal in Minnesota that temperatures were too warm. We couldn't sustain ice. In some cases, there was ice, but it was too thin for people or snowmobiles to be safely on that ice. So very unusual. It's unfortunate that these events all got canceled, but that was what happened this very unusual and very warm January. In Indiana, something interesting happened with the lakes being open. Having no ice on them allowed for Northwest Indiana to have a very heavy lake effect snow event that occurred on January 19th. This was right after that Arctic air mass that we were talking about just a little bit earlier. LaPorte, Indiana, up there, the far northwestern Indiana, had 21.9 inches of snow on January 19th, which turned out to be their all-time one-day snowfall record at that co-op observing site. And they have a 76-year period of record there. This lake effect event continued on into the 20th, and when all was said and done, there was as much as 36 inches of snow that fell in far northwest Indiana. You'll note the radar image on the right. Very unusual. You can see these individual bands of snow that the Weather Service reported that said that snow was falling at the rate of 2 to 3 inches an hour in each of those individual bands that you see there as they moved from north to south. And again, there were enough of those to accumulate to a huge amount of snow. Unfortunately, that snow did not stay around for a really long time. As temperatures moderated, the snowpack melted off there very quickly. One interesting thing that you might not expect in the month of February are tornadoes. And in southeast Wisconsin, there were 2 tornadoes that occurred on February 8th. In fact, those were the first 2 tornadoes reported since records began in 1950 in the state of Wisconsin. One of the 2 tornadoes was a high-end EF2 that moved from Rock through Dane and Jefferson counties. That's down to the south of the Madison area. A 24-mile tornado path on that one. It's very unusual. That's something that we think about happening in spring, but certainly not in February. Second tornado was an EF1 in Greene County, which is also in south central Wisconsin. Total damage on these 2 tornadoes was over $2 million. So very unusual. And again, first tornadoes on record in the state of Wisconsin. So again, this weather is more like spring than winter. So as we start thinking about spring, in some places, especially in the southern parts of our region, we're starting to see the emergence of spring flowers. The picture on the left from Mr. Keeney, that works for the National Weather Service in Pleasant Hill, Missouri, said this is the earliest he's ever had a crocus blooming in his yard. And that picture was taken on February 8th. The picture on the right was taken from here on the Kansas State University grounds. Some daffodils that are coming up. And I took that picture on the 13th there. So for those areas furthest to the south within the north central region, the warmer temperatures that we've seen and our soil temperatures are warming up, we're starting to see the emergence of our early spring bulbs. Now, on this next map, we have from the National Phenology Network something called the Spring Leaf Index. This is an index of when the first lilac and honeysuckle leaves begin to emerge. And this program tracks where those leaves emerge and produces this composite plot for the United States. Now, you'll note that nowhere in the north central region, with the exception perhaps of a small area of western Kentucky down to the southeast of Paducah, nowhere in the north central region are we in this shaded area yet, which means that lilacs, honeysuckles, the leaves have yet to emerge. But for those areas where they have emerged to the south, the intensity of the darker green colors indicate just how unusual it is to have those leaves emerging this early in the year. And for southern Oklahoma, for example, this is the earliest in once every 5 to 10 years. So we're going to watch this as it moves north through March and see how far ahead of normal spring arrives. And if indeed the pattern continues and that we indeed see spring beginning early. Now, if we take a look at frost depth right now, it kind of looks like spring in a lot of areas because the ground is not frozen. Anywhere Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, even up into South Dakota, there's no frost depth because the ground is not frozen. There are some areas that are frozen, and we see upper peninsula of Michigan, northern Wisconsin. Most notably, the ones I think that stand out the most are the 2 numbers there you see for Bismarck and for Grand Forks, North Dakota, where the frost depth is 33 inches. And it turns out the lack of snow is one of the reasons why that frost depth is so low, because The snow was not on the ground. There was no insulating properties for that snow, so the ground was bare and froze quite effectively. So for those areas further to the south where there is no frost depth, we can take a look at the soil temperatures. This was as of February 15th, and we see again below freezing soil temperatures in North Dakota. But as you get into South Dakota, Nebraska, and especially Kansas and Missouri, temperatures. Now, this map admittedly has got some 2-inch soil depths and some 4-inch soil depths because not every state measures at the exact same level. So this is kind of a mix of 2 and 4-inch snow depth, or excuse me, not soil snow depth, but soil temperatures. But the fact that these two are put together gives us a pretty good idea as to what's going on around the north central region. And indeed, where we've seen in Kansas and Missouri the spring bulbs emerge, we've got soil temperatures running near to slightly above 40 degrees right now. How about the rest of the north central region? Are we going to see soil temperatures at those levels anytime soon? Well, let's move forward and take a look at our forecast outlooks. And we're going to start with the precipitation outlook for the next 7 days. This takes us from the 15th through the 22nd of February. We see a streak of moisture running from southern Montana through South Dakota. That's an event that's scheduled to take place here in the next 24 hours with the potential for some snowfall in those areas. Unfortunately, we don't see really anything in North Dakota, Minnesota. We certainly would like to see more moisture in western Montana. We don't see it at this point. There's some light precipitation there. And of course, at this point, we'll take anything that we can get, but it doesn't appear that there's going to be widespread moisture in the next 7 days. Let's go a little bit further out in time, though. Now let's go to the 8 to 14 day outlook. That takes us from the 22nd through the 28th, almost to the end of February. And wow, check it out. Above normal temperatures are forecast in the north central region, pretty much everywhere, with maybe the exception of far western Montana. These probabilities up to 70% of above normal temperatures returning to these areas. So like we talked about before, the probability of the Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan setting their all-time warmest winter looks really good, especially given this map with the potential for much above normal temperatures in these areas here in week 2. What about precipitation? Right now, it looks to be near normal. There are some above normal areas in Ohio, Indiana, lower Michigan, and some encouragement there in western Montana. We see a little bit higher probabilities for above normal precipitation. So let's hope that turns out to be the snowfall that they desperately need in that area. Let's take a look at the month of March and take a look at the northern region. Kind of looks like El Nino again, doesn't it? We see an above normal probabilities for above normal temperatures, rather, in the northern tier of the states. Equal chances a bit further south. And that means 33% chance of above, below, and near normal. How about precipitation for the month of March? Well, at this point, a lot of areas are equal chances. There's some above normal probabilities for much of Nebraska, northeast Colorado, as well as southeast Wyoming, and a bit of below normal for UP of Michigan and northern lower Michigan there. And how about March, April, May? So now we're going to take that month of March that we just looked at, we're going to add April and May to it. And this looks a lot like the month of March for the temperature map, except the probability is now even higher, which suggests April and May could be much above normal as well, especially along the Canadian border, with equal chances more likely further to the south across Nebraska and Kansas. And if we take a look at seasonal precipitation outlook, there's possibility of above normal precipitation for areas from Nebraska through Iowa over to Ohio. It's not particularly high probabilities, mind you, but keep in mind that seasonal precipitation, you should not expect to see 80 or 90% chances of anything at this point. This is just a tendency towards above normal precip. Unfortunately, it looks like for northwest Montana, below normal precipitation is probable there. So we'll just have to wait and see whether or not we can get that snow deficit taken care of in that area. Let's also take a look right now at the Drought Monitor. This is the most recent issuance of the U.S. Drought Monitor map that came out just this morning. And it's good to see there is no D4 anywhere in the north central region. It's been a long time since we could say that. The darkest areas we see right now, we see area of D3 across a lot of northeastern Iowa, extending up into far southeastern Minnesota. A number of areas are now drought-free, which is great news. The entire state of Kentucky, almost all of Ohio, is drought-free at this point. Some small areas also in Indiana and Illinois. Now, how has this map changed since the beginning of December? If we can take a look at a second map here that shows us the change in drought category since December 1st. And the green areas, that's good news. That means that the drought conditions have improved. And for parts of Kansas, as well as west central Missouri and southeast Kentucky, since December 1st, we have improved our drought category, or by three category improvement in those areas, which is great news. The unfortunate side of this, again, are the yellows and the oranges that you see not only in the UP of Michigan, where we know that there's been a lack of snow, but especially in Montana and Wyoming, where we see the areas around Bozeman down to the Yellowstone has degraded by 3 categories since the start of December. So that's definitely not good news and not something we want to see there. And it is, of course, reflected in the maps that we looked at earlier with the low percent of the snowpack there. What happens in the spring? Are we going to see improvement in drought conditions? Well, the most recent outlook that was issued just today, in fact, shows that, unfortunately, for areas along the Canadian border, that drought development is expected or likely to occur between now, the 15th of February, through the end of May. Drought will probably persist, according to this map, across western Montana, as well as in Iowa. There are some potential for improving conditions. In the areas that are shaded in green, drought removal is likely, and that includes parts of far southern Iowa, eastern Nebraska, as well as parts of Kansas, at least those areas of Kansas that are currently in drought conditions right now. So good news for some. Unfortunately, for the far northern states, it's not good news right now. Let's take a look at the river flood outlook. This covers the period from February through April. The graphic you see here and the individual squares that are plotted on the map, anywhere that you see a green square, that indicates that between now and the end of April, there's less than a 50% chance of flooding. For any place where there is a square that is not green, that means there is greater than a 50% chance of flooding. And the severity of the flooding depends on the color of the square. For the locations that you see here that are orange, that it means a greater than 50% chance of minor flooding. And that includes the areas around the Wabash River extending down to the Ohio River. Now, it's important to note that this map that you see here is not unusual. This is not indicative of a very severe flooding risk that's going to take place this spring. It's normal to see some locations have the risk of minor flooding. So do not be alarmed by this. Let's go a little bit further west and take a look at the north central region. Again, we see mostly green squares. That's good news. There are some areas of orange and a few locations that have red squares. That indicates greater than 50% chance of moderate flooding. The good news, at least for the state of Illinois, is those squares are not on major rivers. There are some smaller tributaries where there are those probabilities. And one of the more extensive areas is the Red River in North Dakota. And the reason for that is not that there's this great expectation of heavy precipitation. There was a heavy rain event that occurred in North Dakota and Minnesota right at Christmas time, where 2 to as much as 4 inches of rain, as well as some freezing rain, fell. That was followed by much colder conditions that froze the ground, and that heavy rain that fell is now locked into that frozen ground. And we saw earlier how the frost depth is 20 to 30 inches in this area. So the reason that there are orange and red squares here is the expectation that as the ground thaws, that moisture that is in the ground is going to seep out and potentially run into the river. So again, this is not a widespread thing. We would certainly be greatly concerned if we saw red and purple squares all over the entire map, and we don't see that, but it's something to be aware of. Excuse me, I went in the wrong direction there. Here's our third and final flood slide. That covers the Missouri River Basin. And again, we're in the green here for almost every place, with the exception of Missouri. And we see some orange and red squares there. Again, for the most part, those are smaller tributaries and not something we need to be concerned about. And in general, this map is not unusual. The fact that we see a few orange and red squares does not mean there's going to be major widespread flooding in the state of Missouri. It's individual forecasters who feel that scattered thunderstorms and things of that nature could aggravate a few streams in locations. Not something to be alarmed by. Our last outlook for the presentation today covers our friends El Niño Southern Oscillation. The graphic that you see here represents sea surface temperatures over the last year. And we know in the springtime, we flipped from the triple dip La Nina that we had been experiencing to El Nino conditions. And during the summer months and into the fall, those sea surface temperatures further increased. And at one point, they exceeded 2 degrees Celsius. And some folks in the media decided to term that a super El Nino. And we're still in El Nino conditions right now, but is that going to continue? Let's take a look at the outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. We're still under an El Nino advisory, as the probability of El Nino continuing in the short term is still a virtual certainty at 100%. But as we go into the spring months, we see March, April, May, and then notice as we get to April, May, June, there is an abrupt drop in the El Nino probabilities, and those neutral probabilities become the highest. As we go a little bit further towards late summer and into fall, we see the predominance of the probabilities of La Nina events being the most likely phase of of ENSO at that point. And for that reason, we are now officially under a La Nina watch. That means that La Nina conditions are expected in the next 6 months. The exact onset of La Nina conditions is still uncertain at this point because it's again, at least 6 months out. So we cannot say definitively at this point that summer conditions are going to be particularly dry as a result of La Nina. We don't know yet. We're going to have to wait and see how the La Nina develops here over the coming months. That is my final slide for today. If you have any comments or questions, you can use the chat feature as we talked about earlier, or you can contact either me or Dennis Toddy, Doug Cluck. Their contact information appears on the screen there. Some of the websites you can visit, some of our NOAA sites have wonderful information, very useful. Again, if you'd like to go back and review the slides from this webinar or anyone that's been presented previously, visit either of the 2 URLs you see on the screen. And remember to please join us March 21st, 1 p.m. That's when we'll have our next regularly scheduled webinar. Becky Bollinger from the state of Colorado will be our presenter then. Thank you for your time and attention.
Hey, thank you, Matt. Can you go to the fire weather map that you had, please?
The fire weather map.
That's one of your later ones I asked you to put in the earlier. So I want to go there now because we got a question about fire. So one of your extended.
We do.
One of your,
yeah.
Or did you cut those off?
Not here. I did, unfortunately, but I do. I will point out before the question that there was a fire outlook that suggested there is a much higher than normal chance of wildfire conditions in the month of March over much of Minnesota, northern Wisconsin. So perhaps the question is related to that.
Okay. It is related to that. So let's cover that. It's the last question, but I'm going to go to it first. I think, let's see, got a question about above normal the continuation of above normal temperatures, below normal precipitation, especially in to our north and west. Our north and west being Kansas and Missouri, where we are. And the likelihood of another smoky spring, summer, whatever, due to forest fires and such. I do not know the conditions. I have to admit, I have no idea what the conditions are in Canada, where the huge fires were last year at this time. Maybe Laura does, I don't know. But my overall thoughts are, where you don't have snow and you don't have snow cover, the likelihood of drying out sooner raises the probability or possibility, if you will, of more fires, and thus more smoke in our neighborhood, if you will. I don't know if Matt, if you want to talk anything about Kansas, lack of snow, or Laura, for that matter, because I think Laura had some comments about that the other day in terms of fire and worry and concern, at least in South Dakota.
Sure, Doug. This is Laura Edwards from South Dakota. I can take a stab at what I know. I did also look at the wildland fire potential, their outlook for significant fire in the spring season. And in Montana, maybe surprisingly so, they don't show especially higher risk than normal for large or significant wildland fire. But still, they do update that each month, similar to what we do here with these outlooks. So yeah, here in South Dakota, I know in eastern South Dakota, where we have some lingering dryness and drought concerns, now that we've essentially melted our snowpack last week, with the exception of what we got just yesterday, there is concern for fire even in eastern South Dakota, because the sloughs really aren't that wet. Those low spots really did not get a lot of standing water or surface water. Most of that moisture went into the soil, which is good news for other reasons, but yeah, a lot of dry vegetation now as we get into the spring is what we call the shoulder season, before we get really into our wet season later.
So one more comment. Yeah, Laura's right. If you look at the wildfire outlooks, those are for above normal activity, sort of an advisory or an outlook for that. They're pretty much focused on Minnesota, northern Iowa, and Wisconsin because of no snow there, which is highly unusual. And those outlooks only go through May. So no matter what, there'll be some snow in April and May for sure at the higher elevations in the west. Okay, I can't speak for the Southwest or the far west, but certainly in our neck of the woods, there'll be some snow. That's the snow melt season. But it'll be interesting to see in the next few months as things evolve, whether those areas receiving less snow than normal, high elevations anyway, start getting that advisory category or red. It turns red on their maps, where they're expecting significant wildfire activity. Okay, moving on. This is for anybody. What impacts, if any, can we expect from yo-yoing from La Niña to El Niño, or actually from El Niño to La Niña, and back? Actually, it's La Niña to El Niño, now back to La Niña again. I guess that's really the point. First of all, let me just start by saying it's not highly unusual that we change from La Niña to El Niño. And also, it's not that unusual from especially a strong El Niño, to quickly dissipate and move into La Niña territory. What's all that silliness mean? It means that the oceans in the equator, Eastern Pacific mostly, are going to change rapidly into cooler than normal temperatures, starting, as Matt was indicating. You can go back a slide or two, Matt. Was it April, May, June, or May, June, July, something like that? Yeah. Nope, too far. Go to the bar map, the bars. There you go. So down at the bottom there, all those little letters mean May, June, July, June, August, all that stuff. The blue bars sort of indicate what the probability of getting to be a particular type is. So La Niña doesn't grow over 50% until we get to July, August, and September. Sometimes there's a lag often there's a lag between El Niño, La Niña, La Niña, El Niño, just because the atmosphere takes time. The whole Earth atmosphere takes time to readjust to the new reality, if you will. So if the La Niña does occur, we may not see, and it's very hard to predict, sort of impacts from that until the fall. And believe me, next month and the week after, or month after that, and the month after that month, we're going to cover all this. So we'll see how this evolves. If you're trying to make longer term decisions, I know it's kind of tough, but our best bet right now is what you see for El Niño, La Niña is this. Overall, that means the opposite of what we're seeing this year. That warmer and drier north turns into cooler and wetter north and northwest. That's generally what happens with a La Niña. A little further south than that, say Nebraska, Kansas, it's a 50-50 shot, because we never know if we're going to be getting the impacts from the north side or the south side, because the south side, the southern part of the U.S., tends to be a little drier and warmer than normal. So it's just the opposite. El Nino, La Nina. All right. Boy, lots of questions popped up here. Sorry, I'm probably not being clear. Let me see. Let me go back to the top. We want to compare, soil moisture conditions in 2024 so far compared to 2012. And if people remember 2012, it was an incredible year, record heat. March was off the charts in terms of heat. If you remember, we had 3 weeks of 70s and 80s across the Midwest, and very odd. And everything started growing. Then we got some cold temperatures. Then it went back to warm and dry. All right. Laura, I don't think Matt was, I don't know what you're doing at that time, Matt, but I know Laura was around. So Laura, do you have any comments about 2012 in comparisons to that? Right now, I'd say the only thing that's similar in any way are temperatures are a little high. Precipitation is a little bit different.
Yeah, you're right, Doug. March of 2012 is really when that drought accelerated with the very warm temperatures in that March of 2012. But the way I saw it is a lot of that dry pattern started back in July of 2011, at least here in the western side of this region, where we're coming off of that big flood in the Missouri River, and things just did a 180-degree turn as far as moisture goes. And so I know at least in the western Corn Belt region, we saw that really start in the summer of 2011. I did see that question, and I kind of cherry-picked a few stations here, just looking at some climate history there. And yeah, some areas were wetter in that 2011 and 12, and some were drier than we are this year. So yeah, I think going forward though, as the drought outlook, so the seasonal drought outlook showed, we are concerned going forward for potentially some expansion in drought, given the lack of snowpack, and warmth now.
Yep, and it's not the end of the story. I mean, we have spring to go through, right? And spring is spring always tells us a lot.
Yep, that's the other piece, Doug. Yep, thanks for prompting me on that. Yeah, so here, April, May, June comprises about 40% of our annual precipitation here, at least in the western part of this region. So yeah, we still have a lot of time left ahead of us to see if we're going to head into drought this summer or not.
Yep, one comment was, looks like warmer temperatures this winter have caused more rain than snow, and that's absolutely true. Rain in places that we don't normally see rain in December and January. Another oddity, I guess you'd say. Was it good or bad? In some cases it was great, because if the soil wasn't frozen, it was able to get down into the soil column and sort of wetten up things in a perfect time of year, because nothing else is drawing on that moisture at that time. Now, the person also indicates that it's a good case for what the future may look like in a warmer climate as we move along, and as the trend. Something I don't know if Matt mentioned that or not, but this year, it's not just El Nino affecting us. And that's not why we're setting all these records. It's also partially to blame on trend. Our winter temperatures are our winter warming is far outpacing summer warming. Far outpacing it. So that's a trend. It's due to climate change, but also we're piling on El Nino with that. So this is what we see. Moving on, is there anything to tracking the storms west to east, almost in a straight line? Yesterday's snow that would continue through the rest of the winter. And the answer to that is unknown. But what we are seeing is all that moisture coming into California. Not necessarily, there may be a storm or two that comes through associated with that, but it's vastly weakened. It has to tap or go south of us, I should say, which is very common during El Nino. But it has to tap Gulf moisture and get it up here, or else we don't benefit from that from a moisture point of view. Okay. Likely above, we talked about the snow and yo-yoing, and how about Mississippi levels impacted by the low snowpack in Wisconsin? So that's interesting. Matt, I don't know if you want to talk about that. We did get an email late in the game on that. Do you want to say anything about that, or should I take it?
So the question is specifically, what do we expect to occur?
It's sort of what's going to happen to the Mississippi River impacted by low snowpack in Wisconsin and, well, across the upper Midwest.
Well, I think certainly the concern of the lack of a snowpack in the Missouri and
Mississippi.
the Missouri.
Yeah, Mississippi.
Well, initially the Missouri flows into the Mississippi, et cetera. It depends, of course, where on the Mississippi River that you're concerned about. With, I think it's dependent, of course, on moisture that we receive here in the next few months, obviously. But at least the Missouri part of that's going to be unless there's snow
Well,
increases, there's not going to be a lot in the Missouri to flow through unless they're the ability to release water further upstream. And I don't know if that's always possible.
no, it's not. So the deal is the Missouri is I won't say a minor player. It is a player, but for the lower Mississippi, it's really the Ohio River that matters. And right now, sort of forecasts and outlooks for the Ohio are sort of in between and sort of unknown. At the moment, things are fine on the Mississippi. There's plenty of water for shipping and all the navigation and all that stuff. The long term is TBD, and it's you bet the low snowpacks where you normally have them will make a difference eventually. These things take time. Yes, rainfall will alleviate that to some degree if the snowpack doesn't. Is AMOC really beginning to change, and could this result in any modifications to our north central U.S. weather? I'm not sure. Laura, do you know what the AMOC stands for? I can't remember.
Isn't that it?
Atlantic something?
Yeah.
I'll have to get back to you, John, because I don't know. And if anybody else wants to, I bet Imtiaz knows. Okay. Atlantic modal current, oceanic current. Oh, okay. I have no idea, John. if someone like Imtiaz wants to comment, please do, and I'll just repeat what you say. Otherwise, I have no idea. Oh, he doesn't know either. Okay. Well, Imtiaz was my last hope on that one. Next question is, what are the potential impacts of not having ice cover? Oh, on the Great Lakes this winter. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. So shipping can continue, no problems. That's a benefit, I guess you'd say, to the shippers in the Great Lakes for everything, or less concerned about ice. How about that? There's more chances with open water. You have more chances for lake effect snows. So if, and this is the big thing, if you can get cold enough air over those Great Lakes, you can, as we saw from something Matt pulled up there, you can get incredible amounts of snow all the way into March, it looks like now, with such little ice cover. And yes, coastal erosion, and there are ecological considerations, because once you have ice sort of locked into the shoreline, when the winds do pick up, it doesn't batter the shorelines as much with the ice ring around it. And there are probably a dozen other things I'm forgetting. Let me rewrite. Upper Mississippi River level affected by, yes, definitely, Chris. There will be, although we don't, it really depends on spring rains and how saturated the soils can become. And, you know, that to elevate the base flow in those rivers, or in the river and all the tributaries. We have a lot of, I think Iowa, for example, has a long way to go in terms of replenishing soil moisture at the deep levels, not necessarily at the top. Okay, let's look for the Cumberland River. Oh boy, that's getting really specific. I would have to get back to you on that one, Joe. What does it look like for the Cumberland River Basin, Kentucky, Tennessee? Hey, go back to Ohio River Basin outlook, would you?
Sure.
There you go. And my really bad basin orientation, is it down there? Okay. It basically is saying there isn't an issue right this moment in terms of flooding. I'm guessing, I'm wondering if you're worried about drought or more on the flooding side, because things are pretty, I don't want to say average, but okay in terms of the flooding. Likelihood is probably lower than normal. Yes, they were very dry in the summer. Yep, drought issues ahead. Okay, thanks, Chip. Cumberland has recovered well, according to our Kentucky guy here. and it's going to depend. And like the Ohio River Basin is very dependent on spring precipitation. Snow cover and snow depth often isn't an issue or as big an issue unless there's a lot of snow and a lot of rain on top of it. And you got a lot of flooding. Not this year. This year, also because of El Nino, you tend to have less precipitation in the basin as a whole. However, the southern parts of the basin seem to be wet enough. So, yeah. We'll get back to all of this next in March when Becky Bollinger from Colorado gives us a rundown on the conditions. I want to thank you, Matt, and Laura for stepping in. Our usual egg specialist wasn't here, so we got Laura. She was just as good to comment. So anyway, thanks everybody, and we appreciate you coming. So we will see you next month in March 21st. Have a great month, and thank you, Matt, again.
You're welcome.